and colleagues, welcome back to the Bold by Choice podcast. And today, Jim and I are really excited because we have our very own colleague, Mark Weinberg, back with us again. You guys met him in earlier seasons. So, Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I am excited because Mark, as well as many of our colleagues, does so much work with boards, board training, experience as school leaders working with boards and sitting on boards. So, Mark, before we dive in, I'd love for you to have a moment to share your experience and your lens that you take when we're talking about board governance.
Certainly. Well, I've been fortunate enough to sit in a number of roles within the charter movement, as beginning with a school leader. And I'm always grounded in the first board I worked with. And I was lucky enough to work with a really experienced, wonderful board chair. Decades ago that started, and it's remained with me because the lessons were worth learning and really great lessons. And then I sat in the chair as an authorizer and had the opportunity to attend hundreds and hundreds of meetings for the schools we authorized. And so again, just seeing that absolute variety of activity at board meetings and being able to see where things were working extremely well and sometimes where they weren't, and taking that with me.
I love that because that's why I'm excited to jump right in with you today. Because in my more limited experience, I think a lot of boards, if not all boards, care genuinely and deeply about students and schools. But if we're honest, a lot of boards in their meetings feel a little bit reactive, maybe sometimes compliance heavy or compliance driven. And there are occasions where those board meeting agendas and the board meetings themselves may slide a little bit away from that strategic governance that we train on. Why do you think we see that happen?
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, when you were talking about the boards, because I'd seen that you had suggested that many boards care deeply. My own experiences, again, having attended hundreds of boards, thousands of meetings, that they all care deeply about the schools they govern. And I think that's somewhat unique to charter schools because they're not elected. They're of their community. They're there for the right reasons. And yes, sometimes the activities they engage in are compliance related, and then they haven't had the experience or the support they need to really become an effective board. But deep down, they all care deeply about the schools they're governing. That's absolutely a constant that I've seen across all governing boards.
Yeah, so I want to unpack that tension though. So, why do you think we do see sometimes that compliance heavy focus or even the reactive focus?
It really, I think there's a number of factors that come into that. One is I've seen so many board members who were encouraged to join a board with absolutely no uh, training provided, with no orientation. Just, somebody said, "Hey, I'm doing this. It really helps our community by having volunteer board members come and join us." And that's it. They come and sit on a board, and sometimes that board that they've joined has developed poor habits or has itself not really embraced its role in moving the school forward. And so they just carry on with that.
Mm.
Then there's sometimes external forces, such as the sponsors or authorizers are delivering a message that's focused on compliance rather than performance. And so they get into habits of ensuring they're checking all the boxes to keep the authorizer happy, and they're not focusing on the mission of the school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we were talking earlier, Jim and I, about the importance of remaining in a proactive seat, in a proactive space, and carving out time to say, okay, as a board, this is our strategy. We talk about the North Star. This is what we are working toward every single day, and being able to kind of pull ourselves out of what that kind of sliding scale looks like and back into a strong governance focus. Um, when you sometimes see that a board may be becoming a little bit more performative versus purposeful, what are some of the warning signs that you've seen? You've observed so many boards. What are some of those warning signs?
Well, one big warning sign is silence. You come to a board meeting and there are items on the agenda and they're presented to the board, and the board has almost nothing to say. And frankly, that generally comes from a lack of preparation or
Mhm.
a lack of understanding of what they've been presented. So really providing new board members with really purposeful orientation in terms of what their role is when they first come on the board, and then when they take on a position such as treasurer or president. So really, and being proactive in what we often call sharpening their own saw. So getting that support from an authorizer, from a mentor board member, going out to a training, those really actively ensuring they understand their role and staying in that role then once they've understood it.
Um, Mark, one of the things I love about your perspective is you've led a charter school, you've led private schools in Europe, you worked for Central Michigan University and were in that authorizing role. Your primary focus was academic performance. You've been with a management company. You have seen what we like to call the three-legged stool, right? Schools, boards, authorizers all working together for kids. But each leg of that stool has a different perspective. Now that you've spent so much time seeing it from the board's perspective, if you were back being a school leader or you're advising school leaders, how would you talk to them about how to lead and manage and work with the board?
Certainly with the school leaders, and I do that on a regular basis now, it's essentially the managing up role, where you understand that your board is either your direct employer or certainly has that position above the management of the school, the leadership of the school. Yet they're volunteers who are often unsure of their role and unsure of how to act. And so really very respectfully managing up to your board. And the really effective executive directors, sometimes superintendents, whatever their title is, if they've had that experience with often coming from a traditional district where there is a great deal of turnover and politics and so on, really experienced superintendents really understand how they have to manage up and keep their board focused and aligned to the goals of the school. So that managing up is critical.
So, Vashaunta and I have talked about governance and management not being on the same continuum, but on different planes. Can you talk us through what that means from your perspective, having seen it from all angles?
Yes, and again, the boards remaining in their role where they actually understand where their levers are, where they actually can have influence, as opposed to trying to take on the role of a school leader or management group. And that's understanding that from that plane and remaining on that plane. And then again, where it's really successful, it's a partnership between an effective board that understands its role and a strong leader. Sometimes there are ineffective or weak leaders in schools, and boards are almost forced to step in
Mm-hmm.
because they just are, things aren't moving forward, things aren't being strategically planned for the long term for that school. And again, the ideal situation is getting the right leader in place or bringing the leader up to what needs to be done in the school. But that's often when those planes aren't working correctly, it's because of one of the two parties is not fulfilling its responsibility.
So, when
Mm-hmm.
there's a void, the board's got no choice, right? They got to step in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but again, they're volunteers. They're there, a very short period of time. They don't really they want to step in or they need to step in, but they really don't have the ability or the time to do it effectively.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
in a very simple way, I think of governance as a way a school keeps trust. And the governance function is in part by the board, but in part it's by the board and its leadership team.
Yeah. And I like that you said two things. You talked about levers, one of those levers being leadership. And Jim, I love that you called it leadership team. I think in the cases I've seen sometimes, it is literally the sole leader, whether that's head of school, ED, or principal. But I've encouraged even our board to think about once we have a full leadership team, what does the engagement of that team look like with us? How do we build that relationship across the board and multiple members of the leadership team? And here's why. What if that school leader starts to have something happen where they are not able to operate in that role, but there's only been that one person that the board's communicated with for the entire lifespan, right? And so just thinking about how to stay proactive. Things do happen. People do move on to other ventures or get promoted. And so that's one thing I like. The other two levers we talk about are budget. And so when we say, well, boards have to step in, I believe that boards absolutely sometimes have to step in, but they have to remember what levers they have when they do so. And so it's around that leadership, hiring, recruiting, supporting, evaluating. It's around budget, making sure the budget reflects the values of the school and the academic plan of the school, right? Those things have to be married together. And like avoiding that sliding scale where some of the nice to have things, but they don't quite align with what we said in our contract, what we said our promise was, and keeping our eye on that. And then the third I call resources and priorities, right? So what's on the agenda? What are the priorities and how do we maintain focus there? And I love that you both in different ways called out like what's the actual role, how does the board behave, what are the levers the board can pull to help them stay in that spot.
Yeah, Vashaunta, that team idea is so critical, and the really effective school leaders that I see don't pretend they're doing running the whole school and doing everything in the school. There should always be the expectation from the board that they get a report from the school leader, and in effective board meetings, I see the school leader referencing that report and saying it's in your package. You can read about these activities. And today we have our MTSS coordinator to really give you a deep dive into what we're doing to intervene. Or today we have our transportation department here to tell you about the plans for next year to increase our routes. Whatever it is, bringing in those other leaders in the organization on a regular basis. I mean, every meeting, it would be ideal to have one of those leaders present something of interest to the board.
This is actually a great segue to my next question. When we think about the meetings themselves and how we structure our meetings, that can actually be a teachable moment to teach boards like how to govern and what we believe are like some of the wise ways. And I think meetings reveal a lot about the culture on the board. What are some of the pieces of advice that you have for what can appear for strong meetings? You've witnessed a lot of really strong meetings.
It really is the preparation. Sometimes boards they have been trained that they have to ensure and they should ensure they're in compliance with their open meetings laws and their sunshine laws. And sometimes they feel constrained from asking questions outside of meetings. So ideally, the board receives their materials for their meeting a week in advance, and they should feel free to pick up the phone and call their school leader or pick up the phone and call a fellow board member. Always understanding what your open meetings laws are and how you can converse with others, but coming really well prepared. Questions that you either need to ask in advance because you feel it's more appropriate to ask them in advance, or having good questions that you want to ensure that are asked in that public environment.
Absolutely. I think that's getting to the design of the agenda as well. I think really thoughtful board chairs in conjunction with, if they have an EMO, CMO, school leader, being really clear on what has to be on the agenda, what are decisions that we need to be made, take action on, what are the updates, right? That keeps us in that proactive space. What's coming up? How do we make sure that we're staying attuned to what's in the future? And then, of course, that data piece, like there's always data to go along, whether it's operational, financial, academic, and ensuring that we are very clear as board members on what that data is, what it's telling us, what it's not telling us, so that we can do what? Ask wise questions. And I'm just going to plug, we have tons of examples of wise questions on our website, the National Charter School Institute, in our resources section. So if you're wondering what we're talking about, feel free to check out some of those resources that we have online.
Vashaunta, the other thing I would add, and I was reminded of this last night at a board meeting I attended, the board chair there, when he took over, instituted a practice of it directly reads out the mission statement as soon as the meeting is called to order. And again, if I hark back to that chair that I first experienced many years ago, he didn't do that, but he regularly brought out the mission statement during tough discussions. But again, yesterday, just having it read, and again, this is someone who's been involved with the board for many years. He was a parent previously, yet he understands how important it is to bring everyone's focus every meeting back to the mission.
Mark, you earlier said something about sharpen the saw. And astute listeners will know that's habit 7 of Covey's 7 habits of highly effective people. If you were talking about the 7 habits of highly effective charter school boards, right? What would you tell them? What are those habits that you see? And also give us the the death watch, right? What are the habits of those that are going down the tube?
Right. Well, certainly, starting with number one, be proactive. And again, with board members really understanding that they can certainly be in the present in terms of what is the data, what's our current status, but always being proactive and understanding where they need to go in terms of being ready for renewal, being ready for the next visit or audit. So that proactivity is critical rather than being reactive and what's gone wrong and what do we do now.
All
That's
right, Mark,
certainly
I got to slide in there. I'm going to give a shout out to Eric Thomas, the hip hop preacher, Dr. Eric Thomas, right? He says, don't be ready. He says, stay ready. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
love
an
it.
aspiration for all of our boards and leaders. Like, we are ready for renewal, right? We are ready for an audit. We are bulletproof because we've built the last.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more, Jim. And so on the other side of that are the boards that often aren't planning forward and they get to a tough situation and then they throw up their hands. Well, why didn't we know? Well, in general, it is because they hadn't planned out their year. And when you're planning out your year and you have a board calendar that you're looking at proactively, you know when your audit's coming, you know when renewal is coming, you know when the TEP scores are coming. So you can be asking the questions in advance rather than reactively.
Yeah.
And what's awesome about that, Mark, is if you set up your calendar once, it kind of repeats itself. So you can get into a rhythm and a flow.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said. We talk about be proactive. So, like, tactically, what does that mean on boards? I think there's a lot to be said about how you form your committees, how you structure committee meetings, which are outside of your public board forums, and how you ensure that you have purpose within those committees. And I don't know that we give as much breath to that as I think I have learned, right, in my first year as a board member. That has been transformative to my ability to engage really deeply with the other members of my board, but also our growing leadership team. What are your thoughts on committee structures?
Yeah, so you really just said it there, Vishant, and it's critical that they have a purpose. So you can think of each committee as its own small board, although it doesn't legally have the same authority. It should understand what its purpose is and stay in that lane of its purpose, whether it's a finance committee or a governance committee or an academic committee. And then it should ensure that it's really well staffed because I can't tell you how many times I've sat at a board meeting and there's a required committee report and the person on that committee is just looking down, doesn't look at anyone else because frankly, the committee didn't meet or didn't actually get productive in its time. So each committee should think of itself as a smaller version of the board that really is focused on its purpose and staying true to that purpose and reporting on a regular basis. And if it can't do that, we also emphasize that boards shouldn't assume they need to have a certain number of committees that meet a certain number of times. They
Mm-hmm.
should be purposeful and very much directed at a need of the school rather than just saying, well, somebody told us we need 5 committees and they have to meet every month. They have more flexibility than the board that does have to meet on a certain schedule.
I concur with what you guys are saying on there. And I also want to give a caution, right? School leaders are usually the ones that staff committees of boards and the board as the whole. They only have so much bandwidth. So if you want to zap their energy and take them off focus, have a bunch of non-constructive committee meetings and they're running around all the time. So the purpose of the committee is to help do the work of the board.
Yes.
And I think everybody starts with that premise. The question is this committee and is this meeting helping propel the work of the board,
Mm-hmm.
or is it what Zig Ziglar might call mistaking activity for accomplishment?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a great caution to us all. Well, as we head toward the close, Mark, one of the things we've been doing is using our bold by choice leadership card conversation deck. And I've drawn a card today for the three of us to grapple with as we wrap up. And it's out of the category of bold leadership. And so it starts with a quote by Simon Sinek. And it says, leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. So the question for discussion is how do leaders care for their teams while maintaining high expectations for performance? We can flip that to boards, right? How do board members care for one another, care for their team while maintaining high expectations for school performance?
Jim was on that track a moment ago where a school leader's job is often thankless. You know, they talk about the loneliness of being a school leader. And so the board's recognizing that and ensuring sometimes in outside of the board meeting where a board chair will
Mm-hmm.
have a one-on-one with the school leader to ensure that they are using self-care practices and ensuring that they are not burning themselves out. So getting that feedback one-on-one, if there's a committee that does that on a board that evaluates the school leader, really focusing on that care of the leader and retention of the leader, because there's nothing more disruptive to a school than leadership turnover. And
Mm-hmm.
so really putting a focus on that. Many board members take it for granted, and it shouldn't be taken for granted.
I want to put a hammer on that nail. Great boards understand that what makes a great school is a great leader and a great team. And so they do everything they can to attract a level 5 leader, to reward and recognize that leader and keep that leader, because that's how they're going to have a great school. Now, I'm going to go to Kuznets and Posner, the leadership challenge. There's 5 practices that I'm going to say great leaders or great boards do. First one's they model the way. They act the part, they dress up, they show up, they do all those things that we talk about, right? If I linked it to bold by choice, they step up, they stay true, and they help prove the promise together. One of the ways they do that is they inspire a shared vision, right? They're bringing people together, they're unifying them, they're keeping them on that North Star. They challenge the process. They ask wise questions. They don't just assume this is how we do everything, right? Things were done for a certain way at a certain time, but they're continuously improving. They enable others to act, right? Great boards don't really do the work of the school. They have a team and they enable others to act. It's so powerful. And then finally, this is hard work. And that's why great boards encourage the heart of their people, because this is
Absolutely.
heart work and it is head work.
Absolutely. Well, friends, let's head to our boardroom moment. At your next board meeting, I'm going to ask you all to do this. Review your agenda and ask yourself, how much of your time is spent governing strategically versus receiving information? Because strong governance cultures are built very intentionally through disciplined meetings, focused conversations, and clarity around priorities and what matters most. As we say all the time, the promise does not prove itself. Someone has to decide. And in this moment, most of those decisions rest on the board. Well, friends, we thank you so much for staying with us. Mark, thank you so much for being here and sharing the gift of your wisdom and expertise with us. We will be back next week with another episode on board governance. And friends, if you have not hit that subscribe button, please go ahead and hit it. You don't want to miss a beat. You want to be with us and get those notifications when new episodes come out. Well, we'll be back same time, same station next week. And until then, stay bold.